Hi, and welcome to this new podcast, Rob's 3 Rs. Interesting? Well, I will let Rob tell you all about this a little later. I'm your host, Niyanta Singh-Maharaj, and today we are honored to have a true legend of Pietermaritzburg, Rob Haswell, joining us. Hi, Rob. Welcome. So tell us about your podcast name.
I think when people hear 3 Rs, it takes them back to their early school days, reading, writing, arithmetic. My 3 Rs are rugby, ranting, and raving. So in the podcasts, I don't necessarily deal with them in that exact order, but you can expect every third episode would likely be rugby. Because we keep winning world championships, so you can't leave rugby out. And then there's always something to rave about that's exciting in this wonderful country we live in. By the same token, there's invariably also something to rant about. Mm-hmm. So not necessarily always in that order, but rugby, rants and raves are the 3 Rs.
Great, sounds fantastic. So Rob Haswell is not just a rugby enthusiast. He's a cornerstone of Pietermaritzburg history and development. As the city's first democratic mayor, a former member of parliament, and a dedicated historian and geographer, Rob has spent decades shaping and documenting the narrative of this beloved city. Currently serving as editor-at-large for The Witness, he continues to provide insightful commentary on both the city's heritage and the sport he loves. Rob's passion for rugby is deeply personal and profoundly influential. In today's episode, The Making of a Rugby Addict, we'll delve into Rob's multifaceted journey from playing rugby to becoming an influential figure in the sport. We'll explore how his experiences in sport, politics, and education intertwine, and how rugby has served as a unifying force in his life and community. Let's kick off. So, Rob, tell us about yourself and how your interest in the sport was sparked.
Well, let me start at the beginning. I was born in Johannesburg in 1944. I was the youngest sibling. I had 3 older brothers, which I'll come to later, who played rugby and encouraged me to do so. But far more importantly, my mother and father divorced. My father was an Englishman, a Londoner. Cricket and soccer were his main loves. From the north side of London, so naturally he supported Tottenham Hotspur and so on. And he always believed that I should concentrate on cricket and soccer, that I was too small for rugby. However, my parents divorced in 1948. I think for most people, you look back at it and say, gee, wouldn't it have been better had they not? In my case, I think it's the exact opposite. Because it was a bitter divorce, which meant that everything my father said, my mother, who was from Wales, where rugby is king, my mother automatically resisted. So if my father said concentrate on cricket, my mother said, to hell with him, don't listen to him. You're not too small. Welsh people are small, but we still play rugby. So I was caught in that crossfire, if you like, having older brothers and so on. So it started at an early age. In 1957, what was I? 12 years old. My older brother took me to the Ellis Park Stadium, which is now Emirates Airline in Johannesburg, to watch the Springboks play against the visiting British Lions, who had a number of Welsh players in. My mother made sure that we met the Welsh players in the days leading up to the game. So I had a very real interest. I knew who the Springboks were, but I actually knew because I'd met 3 or 4 of the Welsh players before the game. We got to Ellis Park at about 5 a.m. in the morning, sat outside in a long queue, went in, and in those days, Ellis Park had the main grandstand, but opposite that was a huge grass embankment. Now, to this day, people say that 90,000 people attended that game.
Sure.
I didn't count them all, but I'll take their word for it. We got in early. I think the gates opened at about 7. So we got in halfway up the embankment, so we had a good view. It's meant to be standing room only, but of course we were there early, so we were seated. But one was, of course, completely surrounded by Afrikaans-speaking people. Not a problem at all, and so on. But I soon learnt just how fanatical people are about rugby. The game itself, the Springboks and the British Lions, one of the most exciting games ever. The lead changed hands. Springboks would take the lead, the Lions would come back, and vice versa. So it was a ding-dong. You never knew which side was getting the upper hand, you see. And I vividly remember the middle of the second half, an Afrikaner sitting next to me turned to one of his friends and said, "Damn it, who taught these Englishmen to play rugby?" Now, my older brother, who'd been born in England, came out here. He responded and said, "You moron, the English taught us how to play this game." I didn't know what the word moron meant, fortunately, at that time, but it sort of put an abrupt end to the conversation. One of the greatest, most moving photographs ever taken at a rugby game was taken in the final minute of that 1957 test. You're looking at it now. The Springbok kicker, Jack van der Schyff, had an opportunity to win the game. The score at the time was 23 to the Lions, 22 to the Springboks. Sadly, he missed the kick, and as you see from the photograph, he almost fell over. He was so disappointed in himself that the kick had gone wide. I think if you ask Lions or Springbok supporters anywhere in the world, they know that photograph.
They will remember that.
It's an immortal. It's an immortal photograph. So that introduced me. Of course, when we got home from a block away, one could hear that my mother had the Welsh anthem playing and singing and so on. And so from that day in household, whenever the Wales or any Welsh players played against the Springboks, it was a world war. There was no neutrality in that. And even when the Springboks did, as we did most often, beat the Springboks, my mother would simply say, "You might score more points than us, but you will never beat us." So it was impossible not to get involved and realize how important rugby was. So to have a Welsh mother and then to be born, which is a Welsh mad country, you start growing up in a Welsh mad white South Africa. Well, that's heaven.
Yeah.
From a rugby point of view. It's not so good if you want anything else, but it's wonderful. In 1957, that same year, I got into high school. Now, again, in South Africa, as a young boy, you play soccer in primary school, and whether you like it or not, you move from short pants to long pants in high school, and you abandon soccer, which is a girls' game, and you play rugby, which is a man's game. Now, my problem was in 1957, I went to Highlands North High School in Johannesburg, which really was a soccer school. Most of the youngsters played for Highlands Park Soccer Club. Rugby was very new, and of course and I got the nickname of Tikkie Brick because I was extremely short, to put it mildly. Again, my father would remonstrate with me. Whatever brains you've got are going to be knocked out of you if you play that stupid Afrikaans game called rugby. So he would refuse to come and watch me, whereas my mother was pushing me, saying, "Don't worry about him. Don't listen to him, listen to me," and so on. when you're that size in rugby, you can only play scrum half. And because you're small, you have to dive pass with the ball. You're not strong enough to pass it. So to give your fly half any breathing space, you have to learn to dive pass, which isn't fun on hard Johannesburg fields, especially when bigger guys can simply just dive on top of you after you've passed. So after 2 seasons at scrum half, I thought, I'm either going to get bigger and stronger or I'm going to play tiddlywinks, but I cannot keep getting bruised in rugby. And in this next team photograph, you'll see by 1962, I'd grown somewhat, became strong enough to move to fly half and captained the 1962 first team at Highlands North.
Oh, well done.
Interestingly, got a call one day to say, the rugby coach said, hey, there's a team from Maritzburg College coming up. They tour in Johannesburg, and we can play them on either a Wednesday or a Saturday afternoon. Which would you prefer? So I said, look, it's no good Saturday because all our schoolboys go everywhere they play soccer. Said, let's take Wednesday afternoon. We'll lock the school gates so nobody can go home, and then at least we'll have home ground advantage and we'll have most of our supporters there. So we agreed, Wednesday it is, Maritzburg College. So I think at about 1 o'clock, the school gates were closed. And I remember being in my classroom and suddenly we heard hooting and all sorts of stuff. Looked out the window and blow me down. There was a line of cars with people, which I now know as famous black whatever flags, exactly, wearing straw bashes.
The red, black and white.
The red, black and white stuff. So the Johannesburg branch of Maritzburg College Old Boys had arrived in numbers. They took over one complete side of the field. So it turned out it was more of a college home game than a Highlands North home game and so on. But I got to meet in particular, the captain of college in 62 was Dave Anderson. We're still good friends to this day. And then this funny little man who sat on a little walking stick alongside the touchline got introduced to me as Skonk. I didn't know what the heck Skonk meant. So I met Skonk Nicholson and Dave Anderson. And as fate would have it, when I came to live in Pietermaritzburg in 1974, 2 of the first people I ran into on a city street was Dave Anderson and Skonk Nicholson. So later on, my sons were all educated at college, but people often think I was born in Maritzburg, and because I know a little bit about Maritzburg College rugby, they assume that. And I say, no, it's by sheer chance that I got to know about college and its focus on rugby, and got to come back to the city in 1974 and slip right back into it. So I ended up playing rugby at school level and then league level after that, from 1957 to 1987.
That's a long time.
That's 30 years, and for most of those years, in order to do that, I would train every day. So I would be generally on the small side, but I would be at least the fittest. So if I had to play a full game, I could play. And yes, you get injuries. I broke ribs, wrist, collarbone, cuts on the head, a concussion once. That's par for the course in rugby, but I managed to avoid major knee or injuries that would curtail. So I had 30 years of playing the game. After high school, I went to Wits, and that was a real treat because at high school, Highlands North, I was captain of the team, but we weren't a strong team. So Jeppy, Kess, Parkdown, they loved playing against us because they were bigger, rougher, and they would knock the hell out of it. I get to Wits and suddenly I'm in the same team as all these guys from Jeppe, Kess and Parktown. So that was fantastic. Under 20 rugby for 2 seasons, Wits, we were unbeaten. We won the leagues there and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So that was wonderful. And that convinced me that university rugby, running, passing the ball, rather than trying to out-scrum or out-maul, we relied on ball skill and fitness rather than brute strength. And that has stayed with me throughout thing. The next critical one, I had a unique opportunity. I found myself, having graduated with an honors degree in geography from Wits, I win a scholarship to go and study in the US.
Excellent.
I get a master's degree there at a university which was focused on basketball. But then I got a visiting professorship at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. And LSU is a football, and I say football campus. It's hard to imagine that a university takes American football that seriously. Their stadium seats 95,000 people.
Sure, that's
so it is the biggest thing
huge amount of people
in Louisiana.
Yes.
So if you ever want to start a rugby team in America, the best place to do it is in a football crazy.
Yeah.
Because although football looks very different, there's pads, there's different rules, it grew out of rugby.
Yes.
So I'll show you a couple of clippings. A couple of guys said to me, hey, we've got a rugby ball. Can you help us start a rugby club? And I said, hey, guys, what are you, ridiculous. Who are we going to play against? And they said, no, there's 1 or 2 teams in New Orleans, 1 or 2 in Texas. So within an hour or 2 drive, there's other teams. So I called a meeting in the student canteen and said, anybody interested in playing rugby, which is similar to your football, running, tackling. If you like rough stuff, you'll love rugby. 85 people pitched up. So there I found myself with a very old rugby ball, some very old rugby shorts, and 85 guys. And I said, all right, we found a practice field that nobody else was using. 85 people came out. They saw me in shorts. They said, oh, do we have to play in shorts? Because they said, no, football, they play in longs.
The longs, yes.
I said, yeah, shorts, no padding.
No helmets.
No helmets and that and so on. But that forced me then not just to say, okay, you know how to play the game. How do you teach others about rugby? Okay, they've come out there, they want to. So they're pretty religious in Louisiana. So I said, listen, I'm going to give you 10 commandments. I said, you know football. All right. So the first commandment would be, thou shalt not pass the ball forward, which you can do in American football. The second one is, thou shalt not tackle anybody who does not have the ball in their hands.
Yeah.
The third is, thou shalt not block. All right. So I would spend at least 2 weeks making sure that they almost memorized that. Okay, because you tell them, listen, this is like football. It's a very similar field, exactly the same goalposts, which I'll get to later on. But you can teach football guys, this is what you can't do. Boom. After 2 weeks, we'd play little rugby games, and I could see guys were adapting to the rules. The next phase is say, okay, now you know what you can't do. Now let me teach you how to pass and run. How do you score tries?
Yes.
How do you pass the ball to somebody else who's in a better position than you, and so on? And again, football, basketball, American sports are highly evolved. The coaches call plays. Everybody on the field knows exactly what they need to do for this to work.
Yes.
Rugby's getting to that now, to chalkboard.
Yeah.
But anybody who's played basketball, you can say to them, how do you create a 2-on-1 situation? In rugby, we would say, how do you create an overlap? How do you give the wing space on the outside to score? So I found that very easy because they all understand that if there's two of you and one defender, you draw him and you pass to the open guy and that person scores. So within a month or so, we were still making mistakes, but we were playing reasonable rugby. I was confident enough. We went down to New Orleans. And of course, these other clubs had been playing for a year or two, but we walloped them once. So within 5 or 6 months, we were playing good rugby and we were the best team in the southern United States. We were traveling to Florida. We went to the Bahamas. We beat the local club there and so on. So I had a unique experience in not just playing the game, but establishing a club. How do you coach to absolute beginners and get them to a level where they can play? I come back to Maritzburg then in 1974, begin to live here, start studying the place, find out, read a little bit about Maritzburg's Voortrekker beginnings.
Yeah.
And also I've had a charmed life, I went to Wits to study geography and history and to play rugby.
Yeah.
Nothing else. The fact that I met my future wife on the first day, that's another story, but whatever.
And we look forward to hearing about that.
Oh, yeah, not today.
Yeah.
But I soon got disenchanted with history. It was English colonial history. I had enough of it. So I dropped history as my major and I majored in Afrikaans and Nederlands.
Okay,
which was a strange thing to do at Wits. It was the English-speaking university, but they had an outstanding Afrikaans and Nederlands program. So I majored in that. Years later, I come to Pietermaritzburg and the first records of Voortrekker Maritzburg are written in Afrikaans, Nederlands. Nederlands, Dutch, which is becoming Afrikaans.
Yes.
And I only started reading that and I think, wait a minute, who's written the history of Maritzburg? And of course, it's English-speaking historians. So how can they write about Voortrekker Pietermaritzburg? And I remember going to the archives, I'd ask for documents and they'd say, you're the first person who's ever asked for this.
Yeah.
The minutes of the Natal Volksraad. So to cut a long story short, simply because I have the linguistic ability to read, so on, and to understand that they had town planning regulations, where you could build your house, all those kinds of things were strictly controlled. So it was a very orderly place. So step by step, maybe I've written 20 different publications about Voortrekker Maritzburg.
Yeah.
Without bragging, I completely rewrote it simply because everybody else had been English-speaking only.
Yeah. So, just keeping with rugby, I have got to ask, what is your take on current day schoolboy rugby? I mean, Pietermaritzburg has some of the top rugby schools in the country. There's Maritzburg College, there's Hilton College, Michael House, and, they are all in the top rankings in the country. So obviously rugby is quite a big deal here in the city. And I mean, we literally see schools come alive during rugby season, what with Basher Ridge and the boys of college, magnificent display, blazer displays, competitive shouting, and of course, pure talent that comes out of the Midlands. So, what's your take on schoolboy rugby?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right, because high school rugby forms the basis of a pyramid. And again, sharp contrast. In American high school, they will pick maybe 20 people to play football. So the high school has one team. The rest are spectators, which helped me because I had a lot of people who'd played basketball in high school, but at college, university level, they're superfluous.
Yes.
We don't have that. So to tell them that Maritzburg College fields 25, 30 rugby teams every Saturday morning, they look at you like, where are you? They think you're on Mars or something. They cannot comprehend that.
Yeah.
But yes, we are blessed. I want to talk, in more depth about that, because like many things in this province, good things usually started in Pietermaritzburg and slowly but surely got sucked out and transferred to Durban and Southern Natal Rugby Union, blah, blah, blah. There's very few things. Fortunately, we got the comrades, the Doozy, Midmar, invented, built in the city.
Yes.
They've stayed here, and we need to fight to make sure they stay here. Otherwise, greedy Durban will like to take that. So Maritzburg at one time and the Midlands, in addition to the schools, there were clubs. Now in this city, the university is literally the only club that can still play. But because the Springboks are doing so well, rugby should be thriving. So on campus now, they field 4 men's teams and 2 women's teams. If you drive around Maritzburg now, you'll suddenly see that in the last year or two, primary schools are now playing rugby as well.
It's also quite a spectacle on Saturday mornings at some primary schools.
So it's a real paradox. It's contradictory that at this time when rugby's never been more popular at all levels, that in fact rugby is almost dying at club level in Maritzburg. And I'll have a lot to say about that. And if I can harness some young people, we must certainly reinvigorate that, because you're absolutely right. We produce wonderful rugby players and cricket players, but they all then disappear to all different parts of the country. Nothing wrong with that. But on the other hand, why don't we have? We should have a team in the PSL. We should have a team in the SAT 20. And there was a time when every Springbok side winning a World Cup had a Maritzburg College old boy as their fly-off.
Yes.
From Stransky through to Butch James and so on. And so there's a strong tradition there that we've got these rugby factories in our city. How do we keep that talent here? And so on. Not to deny them opportunities to go elsewhere, earn bigger money and play professionally, but to build a city, a common ethos and spirit around the city. There's nothing like sport. Mandela demonstrated that. Madiba did 2 seminal things. Firstly, I'm sure you'll all remember that at the 1995 World Cup final, he put on a Springbok jersey and he walked out in it, and of course the crowd went crazy. At the annual Loris Awards ceremony, he made a statement, and he said quite clearly and emphatically that sport is more powerful than politics in bringing people together. And that he recognized then that if he wanted to build a new South Africa, sport was one of the most powerful tools to use. And he changed the course.
Absolutely.
He made it acceptable for Springboks cricket, rugby to get back into international sport and so on.
Immediately unified everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, if one man can influence a nation, I mean, he did it. And, even the players in 95 will tell you that when he came to watch them warming up or practicing, or when he walked out wearing their jersey, that it just changed the whole course of rugby and indeed the entire country.
Absolutely.
Yeah, during my rugby career, if I can put it that way, I've been blessed to be involved with 3 clubs. As I said, at Wits University. That club is now over 100 years old. The club that I founded in America at Louisiana State has just recently celebrated its 50th year, and rugby on the Maritzburg campus is also more than 100 years old. So that's another wonderful thing about there is such a depth to the history of rugby. in this country and in this city. But we often take it for granted or we overlook it. That rugby's roots are very deep, very deep.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And with that, it's a wrap, Rob. Until next week. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching.